Good morning once again to this webinar. It's actually for the SHARE project. Sebastian asked me. Sebastian, he's one of the colleagues in the AD office in Jakarta. He asked me to actually explain a little bit to our colleagues across ASEAN. What do we do? What are the actions that we do that follow our agency review? And I will do my best to kind of summarize it in a nice way. But then also we have Patrick from Fleur QA with us from the Flemish part of Belgium, explaining their experience with follow-up activities and what happened after the review, how they approached the recommendations, and so on. So I would just suggest us to dig in, if I say so. I prepared a couple of slides just to support my First of all, ESG European standards are guidelines. They talk about follow-up in a very clear manner in standard 2.3, where external quality assurance processes should include also, as one of the 4 steps, a consistent follow-up. Now, ENQA, as you can imagine it being as an agency, as we do reviews of other agencies, needs to, or better said, does follow this requirement. Now, how do we do that? These are all of our steps. I will not go into them because we talked with Nizam, you will remember, Agus would also remember. We talked about it in very detail already in Brussels. That was last year, summertime. So I will not repeat all these steps, but I will focus really only on follow-up. So what do we do when it comes to a follow-up after an agency review? It is set up to consider actions taken by the agency after we have performed a site visit. We have produced an external review report. There was an approval of the report by our board, and there was a decision making on the membership. And then some of the agencies also send this report to ECHA. And then what? After 2 years, we ask every agency that has undergone a review to do a follow-up report and to send it to the secretariat. So what is included in this follow-up report? I here emphasize the importance of the board letter. After the agency undergoes a review, it receives a letter from our side where all actions related to each of the standards are clearly stated. Next to that, at the beginning of the letter, there's also an elaboration of some specific measures that should be considered or taken by the agency, and this is elaborated by the board. Basically, there might be some standards where the board says, please check one specific part of this standard in particular, and then the agency would need to elaborate how they approach this after 2 years, obviously. Now, I have written here recommendations versus suggestions. Why is this so? Because our external review reports include also suggestions, but these do not need to be considered by the agency, but recommendations that needs to be followed, and the agency needs to explain in the follow-up report how was this followed. Agus, hi, don't worry about it. I'm glad you made it. Indeed, basically, very briefly about the board letter as such. Now, you might ask me further on. I will enable everyone's microphone so that you can do that. What about if an agency says, well, this is a clear recommendations, but we cannot follow it in our, let's say, national setting or regional setting, or we just simply cannot do it at this moment? It is fine. It is important that this is elaborated in this follow-up report. so that the board gets a sort of feedback, what has been done, what cannot be done, and so on. Now, apart from all this recommendation business, if I say so, we ask every agency to also report us on any other significant changes or developments within the agency. It might happen that the agency decided for, let's say, two or three new activities, to shift from program to institutional accreditation, or to have some very different setting when it comes to decision making, these kind of things. Then they would be elaborated in this follow-up report. Now, every agency that has undergone a full or partial review would need to send us a follow-up report. But in case of partial reviews, this is a rather different story. I would not mix it up too much in this presentation, because then it would get a bit complicating. But basically, if we have an agency that has, let's say, many partially compliant standards, or let's say one or two or three non-compliant standards, then this agency would not become a member of ENQA, but would become a member under review. And in this case, after 2 years, we would ask this agency to undergo a partial review, which is a sort of a follow-up. And in case of these partial reviews, we would go and check every single partially compliant standard and non-compliant standards within this partial review. But this is like I said, a rather different story from a regular follow-up, and I can further elaborate it further on if you wish so, but I just mentioned it here as well because it is part of our follow-up, but for cases that are very rather more complicating. Now, we do publish all our follow-up reports and related board letters on our website. I need to emphasize this. We do that for every single review that we do. Now, you might find this interesting as well. This is a specific of our full reviews. Basically, we call it a progress visit. We introduced it in 2015. I think so far we've done them like a dozen or even a bit more, 15, 16 progress visits. What is it? Basically, after 2 years from the board's decision on membership, every agency would get an opportunity to receive a visit from 2 panel members that were already part of the panel, to further discuss elements of a review or any other topic that is of interest to this agency. It is completely voluntary. It does not need to be. It does not need to happen, and indeed, it does not happen always. Some agencies simply say they don't have time or they don't see value in this progress visit. But most of them do take this opportunity for a voluntary visit, where we are not checking the compliance of an agency on the ESG, but rather we leave the agency with an opportunity to bring up topics that they want to, in order to further enhance. It is very much enhancement oriented visit. Basically, a lot of strategic talks, if you wish. So some of the agencies even decide to make big events around it, and then they use this to test their future development ideas with their stakeholders. Students are there, representatives of universities, ministry representatives, and then they kind of use this as an incubator of new ideas. And there are 2 experts that were there to review the agency 2 years ago, but now they can let's say elaborate on what was in the report, but again, from their experience, from their own agencies, provide further advice, if I say so. Now, there's a thin line with consultancy. here, and this is why these two experts would not take part in the review of the same agency, so 3 years after this progress visit, so in the next cycle, right? What I wanted to emphasize here at progress visit is also that we started with this part because many agencies said that it is difficult to get this dialogue through a regular full review because it is mostly compliance oriented, and experts are there to check on compliance. Obviously, they're busy in those 2.5 days doing that, so there's not much time left for these rather, let's say, strategic discussions or any other ways of taking some time and simply sitting down and elaborating on how that particular agency could further develop and so on. The progress visit takes 1 day, and it is already calculated in the fee of a full review. But now you might say, but okay, some agencies don't want to use this. What now? Well, they are entitled to get their part of the fee that refers to a progress visit back. So we do that. We are very clear on that already from the very beginning. It is stated in our terms of reference, and an agency that does not wish to undergo a progress visit would get its money back. What kind of topics we had so far when it comes to progress visits? Some of the agencies were rather straightforward and wanted to talk about those standards that were, let's say, partially compliant or substantially compliant in their full review. And now they want to see what do these experts think of their approach in addressing these recommendations. Some do not go that way, not at all, and they use this opportunity to rather discuss some strategic measures that will take place in let's say a year or two at the agency. And we also had a case, like I briefly already explained, where an agency decided to invite, like I said, the ministry, all university representatives, their leadership, and test the idea of shifting from program to institutional accreditation and how this could be done. And then basically 2 experts that were there, and they already evaluated an agency, added their viewpoints on that. And I got some notes and minutes of that meeting, just because the agency wanted to share it with me, because they really appreciated this opportunity. So they shared with us this kind of excitement on being able to have such event. So this is why I know about this particular event quite in detail, and I'm very happy that they use this opportunity in this way. So yes, this is our progress visit. Now, there are still some opportunities and challenges when it comes to follow-up activities of our ENQA agency reviews. I have listed them some. I was thinking yesterday evening what to list. And here are some that I could think of. Now, opportunities, or better said, already our strengths, are that agencies, we offer our agencies, our members, to reflect on their activities 2 years after the board decision. Basically, it is some point in time before a new cycle of review starts where they can sit down and see what has been done, how it was addressed, what else to be approached before the new review starts. Basically, does the agency have an improvement plan? Is there any setting that will help them overcome the remaining recommendations? And I think in this sense, it is great to have such a thing as a follow-up report. Now, I will later talk about the burden that it gives to agencies, and they're not always happy that they need to write their reflection on what happens with each of their recommendations. That perhaps Patrick will also explain this in a couple of minutes. But still, I put this as a strength, perhaps, of this approach. I emphasize our board letters. They do include as an annex all the recommendations, because sometimes agencies are a bit confused between recommendations and suggestions, and what needs to be followed and what does not need to be followed. So our board letters are very clear on that. And we have not, I would say we have not received any complaint that it would not be clear what to be followed. So in this sense, the board letters are our strength, especially because first page or 2 or 3 even, sometimes it happens, elaborate more in detail what was discussed during the board meeting. And in this sense, it is already a sort of a help to the agency on how to overcome specific challenges. Now, when it comes to progress visits, there's an opportunity to deliberate on topics that are outside the scope of the ESG, if you wish so. And in this sense, I always strongly advise our agencies to undergo a progress visit. They basically already paid for it. Experts are ready to jump in to cover topics that the agencies would wish to be covered. So in this sense, it is a real benefit to the agency. Now, there are some challenges still remaining also when it comes to progress visits. So I listed them here. I see quite many bullets, but we also do our best to regularly improve, so it should be like that. First, I can be quite self-critical that scrutiny and deliberation of the submitted follow-up reports is not always to the level that it should be. The reason is quite simple. It takes quite a lot of time. You can imagine that we have our full reviews undergoing, and then there are other activities of ENQA. The board is really busy. So when we receive also follow-up reports, we do have a scrutiny in place, don't get me wrong, with a clear list of what needs to be checked in this process, and one of our board members does it. Not the same person, obviously, but they rotate, and they submit then an internal report for the rest of the board to understand what was happening in the follow-up report, how the agency followed the recommendations, etc., and should this follow-up report be approved, and what should be written in the follow-up board letter. But this all takes a lot of time, and this scrutiny could be done even better. Now, agencies know that there are no concrete consequences at this point if let's say, some of the recommendations are not followed. So it is seen in many cases, or let's say by many agencies, as a strictly formal procedure. We don't want it to be like that, but it does happen, and sometimes we receive this kind of feedback. Oh, this is just a formality. We need to perform, and all this again, this reporting and so on. And we advise them not to see it that way. It is a way of really checking internally where do agencies stand when it comes to recommendations, what else needs to be done before the new cycle of review starts. But yeah, something that we need to address in our revision of methodology as well. We do not monitor the usefulness of this follow-up procedure. This is perhaps strictly because of its nature. So basically, agencies report back to what was done. in this sense, then we don't go and ask agencies, yeah, how do you feel about it? But it is something that should be included in our IQA as well, and it will be in our revision of our methodology. Now, about the progress visits, there are quite some challenges there as well. I need to be honest. We receive some feedback that agencies would actually miss a more elaborated, a bit more of elaboration on scope and purpose of such visits, which is a bit surprising because the concept of a visit is explained in our guidelines, but indeed it is rather open for different let's say for purposes. But some of the agencies say that they get rather confused with the invitation for progress visit, and they would prefer if we would tell them what should be done in that particular day. We do then have some phone calls and see let's say where does the agency stand when it comes to the recommendations that were given to them, or if there are any, let's say, changes in their methodology happening in that particular year where our experts can jump in and not help but reflect on, and these kind of things. And then we manage to find a way around it. But they do miss a bit more elaboration on the purpose of such visits. Then there's a thin line with consultancy. I already elaborated on that and how we try to address it. We also see that there's more and more there are more and more challenges when it comes to assigning the experts, especially if an agency wants a very specific topic to be covered, then it takes some time to find an expert that would do that. We managed so far, but we see that it takes some time, and it is something that we should consider when we train our experts to have very broad aspects of QA world covered, if I say so. 1/4 of agencies so far decided not to engage in a progress visit. We asked them why, and they say that most of the time it is about effort needed to prepare for such visits. There are documents that obviously an agency needs to submit to these experts in order to understand what is going on and what does the agency want from such progress visits. And so they say, okay, in a way it becomes a mini review, but it is not a review, but we still would not want to go into it. So yeah, this is one of the challenges as well. Now I added one more slide before I leave a word to Patrick. I'm already talking for 25 minutes. Time really flies. Here, this slide talks about our external review. It just concluded this year. We received our report. It was, I think, 2 months ago, where we were substantially compliant on ESG 2.3. And I checked what was the experts panel opinion on our follow-up procedure. They judge it in relation to fitness for purpose of our activities, of our reviews. And in this sense, indeed, they see a rather not little added value, but there is some place for improvement when it comes to our follow-up reports, if I say so. How does it contribute to the agency's enhancement, and how do we make sure that it is not a bureaucratic procedure of checking what is agency doing in between the reviews. So in this sense, they were a bit critical about that. But on the other hand, they saw quite some potential in our progress visits. They were happy to see that we have this element there, because we are kind of with progress visits we are shifting away from compliant aspects of our reviews towards enhancement oriented elements, and we are strengthening this part through progress visits. Now, how will we take these recommendations into account in our revision? I cannot foresee what the board will decide. There are some proposals that our working group made. I can perhaps already share them with you. I'm part of this working group. We are considering having two site visits to an agency, but not having a progress visit anymore. So basically, you take this progress visit and you put it as part of the full review. There is no mini event in between the reviews. Agencies, we hope them to be happier when it comes to burden. It takes away from them in preparing for progress visits. At the same time, the second site visit during an agency review would be focused, I would not say 100%, but most of the time would be for enhancement-oriented topics, for strategic development topics, and these kind of matters. Obviously, not reflecting on to what level the agency is compliant or what will they do with the recommendations, because at that point they will not get this information. But it is even better so, because then we are moving away from a consultancy and this kind of challenges related to progress visits. This is just an idea. We let's see where it takes us, and there will be a webinar with all our members to see whether they what they think of such approach, because we are also introducing many other activities, different ones, and changing some elements of an agency review, and we want to share them with our members before obviously before having them accepted at the board level. Yes, this is briefly about our follow-up activities. Now I will leave a word to Patrick. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Good morning. So yes, my name is Patrick van den Bos. I'm a policy advisor at Vlug QA, which is the Flemish quality assurance agency based in Brussels. The focus of our agency is the program evaluation. That's just something I wanted to mention as an introduction. What I want to share with you today is, in fact, what happened after the site visit. And I also wrote down some reflections based on the presentation of Goran. But first, let me go to the first slides. For me, Yes, so this is the slide with the timeline. We had our ENQA peer review, the site visits from the 10th to the 12th of June. Then we received a first draft of the report on 24th of July, and we had time until the 6th of August to comment on those aspects where we thought that there were some factual errors of things that were not fully right in the report. And then on the 19th of September, we received the decision of ENQA, which was a positive decision. Then we had two Vlug QA boards in the meantime, in October and in February. And between that, on the 1st of January, we drafted, or we published, in fact, new quality assurance manuals. I will come back to that later to stress why this is also important in the follow-up of the ENQA peer review recommendations. And finally, just one day, less than a month, we received also the ECHAR decision. So in fact, this cycle of evaluation is now finished, and now it's time for us to start with a follow-up of what we did. To start, well, in fact, for us, it's already started at the end of the site visit, because at the end of the site visit, you receive first report, first impressions of the panel, and based on those first impressions, our Vlur QA team, which is a small team of now 7 staff members, and our board composed of 4 board members. Together, we already discussed the first recommendations, and what we heard were the insights from the panel. But of course, we are looking forward this summer to the draft report. We commented on that. And after reading the draft report, although it were summer holidays, we immediately start to think on what can we do with the recommendations, and what are our possible measures for the future. And we already prepared some documents to have a first discussion on the Vlur QA board. This was in October. So this Vlur QA board, there we discussed a lot of topics on follow-up and how to follow up the recommendations. And the positive thing was also that, as we already explained to the panel during our site visit in June 2019, due to changes in the legal framework in Flanders, we had to adjust our manuals. And this was also an opportunity to take the recommendations into consideration when finalizing those manuals. And then on the 19th February of 2020, there was a second meeting of the board. And there we already took a lot of decisions on how to follow up some of the recommendations. The next board will be in June, but I will come back later to that. If we look at the things that we adjusted, first of all, the manuals. We have new manuals, so this was really an opportunity for us to make some changes. Important to notice is that the methodology of our agency remained the same. So otherwise, we would have invited the panel again after 6 months to discuss that kind of changes. But no, the methodology remained the same. But we had the opportunity to make some changes, and I will give 2 examples of those changes in a minute. But it was already really important. So in fact, we already could improve less than 6 months after the panel came to our agency. The first thing was the fact that we received a recommendation that we had to give more explicit attention to a number of elements of the ESG Part 1. And this was one of the recommendations. When we received this recommendation already during the site visit, first moment we were surprised, but then in a minute we realized that for us, it was really clear that in fact, all the elements of ESG Part 1 are always in our reports, but we realized that for someone who is not familiar with our reports, they are not that explicitly there. And one of the things that has changes, also thanks to the legal changes, is that from now on, instead of the 3 standards we work with, we have now 8 criteria, and those 8 criteria are really comparable with the ESG Part 1. So in fact, now ESG Part 1 are explicitly also the criteria of our program reviews. This was an aspect that we added to our manual for program assessment. Another aspect that was discussed was our follow-up mechanism. We already had a follow-up procedure, but the thing was and still is that this follow-up procedure was designed in 2018. So there was not really some proof of the function of our follow-up mechanism. And also, it was not a mandatory aspect in our previous manual, in our previous framework. But also from 1st January of 2020, the follow-up procedure is fully integrated in the assessment process. And to be honest, we copied this follow-up procedure a little bit from ENQA, which means that we as an agency, we cannot force programs to do this follow-up. We cannot force them, but they already pay for follow-up, like in the ENQA progress visit. And up to now, when we discussed the contract with the programs for the evaluations, they all agreed to go for a follow-up. We also say that this is obligatory. Of course, we cannot force them, but I believe that in the future, almost all, and up to now, all programs will go for this follow-up. The other recommendations we received were, for example, the recommendation that our VluchtQA board, they in fact, they write an introduction in every report, but the reality is that this is a standard introduction, and in fact, they read the report only after publication. And although, this wasn't habit in our organization, already for many years, we are used to work like this. But then when we received a question from one of the panel members during the site visit, we immediately realized, yes, in fact, we are doing like we are used to do, but we have to change that. And already on the VluchtQA board of October 2019, the VluchtQA board decided that at least 2 members of the board will read the report before the publication. As I write it in the slides, it gives the board the opportunity to ask to us as staff, but also to the panel for some clarification. In fact, also to check if all the standards are addressed in the report. But important thing is that the panel remains the owner of the content of the report. So our board cannot change the content of the report. This is one important aspect I wanted to add. Another recommendation was a thematic analysis. And yes, we were already aware before the site visits that doing this thematic analysis is due to, in fact, also the size of our agency and the size of the activities that we do within the scope of the ESG. Thematic analysis is not our strongest point. But we fully agreed with the idea of having a stronger focus on thematic analysis. So let's go back to the timeline. When we received this recommendation, we, as the team members of VluchtQA, we started to reflect on what else can we do on thematic analysis. We also asked our advisory board for advice, and then we already came with a draft, with some ideas for our QA board in our October meeting. And then, based on the discussion on thematic analysis within the board, in February, the last board meeting, they already made a list of priorities on future thematic analysis. So, in fact, also in that way, the QA board forces us as a QA staff team to focus on thematic analysis and to make sure that we can do better in the future. Another advice was to focus more on international visibility and participation in international projects. And there we felt that we were already doing well, but that we still can focus more on this kind of international projects. One of the aspects is that we as an organization are not funded by government. So if we do a project, there has to be somehow some kind of return. And in many cases, it also has to be some financial return. So this is in fact, something we have to take in consideration when we cooperate with other organizations in international projects. But also there, our QA board decided to give more attention to this, the strengthening, in fact, of our international network. I added some examples. We are now external evaluator in 6 K3 projects. We will host, hopefully, when this crisis, Corona crisis is over, the ENQA GA in October. But next to that, we will also have a new website to make give a better insight to in fact everyone who wants to know more about VLURQS activities, give a better insight about our international activities that we do. And in the last couple of months, we had renewed contacts with our colleagues from CANU, which is the Quality Assurance Agency in the Netherlands. Let's go to the next slides, or yes. The last and final slide, and this was maybe the most difficult topic for us, governance. We have a QA board, which is composed of 4 independent members. This was our choice to have representatives from outside Flemish higher education, because we as VLURQA, we are in fact a quality assurance agency within the umbrella organization of Flemish universities and universities of applied sciences and arts. So to, in fact, also to stress our independence, we wanted to avoid people coming from other institutions in Flanders. But we received the panel's recommendation to strengthen the governance by involving more stakeholders. This is a topic we also discussed and with the advisory board, and also, of course, with our VLURQA board. And we decided to have in June 2020, and let's hope we can do that. Although there is a possibility that we have to postpone it to September, that we have a quality assurance board meeting with also a wider group of stakeholders, students, institutions, but also other new stakeholders, representatives from professional field, and so on. Next to that, we also applied for a project, the Erasmus Plus Key Action 3 project, Support for Policy Reform, where one of my colleagues would go to Iceland to learn more from that agency, because in fact that agency has a similar governance as our agency, and we wanted to learn more about how they involve stakeholders and how they have a good, well-balanced governance. But also there, we think we have to postpone this visit to Iceland. But of course, we will see in the future. And last but not least, the ENQA progress visit, because this recommendation is in fact the most difficult one for us, because we believe that we as quality assurance agency, we really have to be independent from our umbrella organization. And we received a comment from students that they feel involved and they do not feel the need to be part of our QA board. But nevertheless, we also want to follow up this recommendation. And we also think that the topic, or one of the topics of the ENQA progress visits, can be talking about this topic of governance of our organization. So these were a couple of things we already were reflecting on, and you see it was a site visit in June, and after summer we started to reflect on this. GQA boards already made decisions, so we feel that we are now ready to implement some aspects already implemented in the new manual in January, that we feel ready to implement all those aspects. And maybe I can immediately reflect also here on some things that were mentioned by Goran. For instance, the follow-up report. I think that this follow-up report that we will have to write in 2022, that in fact we feel that we already did quite good follow-up, and that in this progress follow-up report we can in fact prove that we are doing on the right track, in fact, and in fact that we can be also proud as an agency of things we already achieved. So we are not afraid of writing the follow-up report. And this will also be interesting because now our report is published on our website, on the ENQA website. And by writing a follow-up report, we can also prove to the wider community that we are doing follow-up, that we also learn from things that were less good in the past. So I think, well, we are as an agency in favor of this follow-up report. Then the progress visit, although it's our board, the QA board, that still has to decide if you want to have this progress visit. I believe, in fact, there is no doubt that we will like to have this progress visit. As I mentioned, for instance, because of the fact that we can discuss there about governance, because we already paid for it. But also this gives us the opportunity to reflect more on a couple of topics. And maybe these topics, it will be in 2 years, so maybe these topics are not clear for us now, but I think a lot of things can change in 2 years. So by then there will be some topics that we really want to discuss with some panels. The comment that some agencies want a more elaborate scope and purpose of such site visits. Well, in fact, we as an agency, we are not looking to a midterm site visit. We are looking forward to have this more enhancement-based talk with some experts to make our procedures and so better in the future. And if you ask me about the fitness for purpose, if you ask me to choose between the follow-up report and a progress visit, then I think I agree with the panel that reviewed ENQA that in fact this progress visit is for us as an agency more beneficial than writing the follow-up report. And then last but not least, the board letter. In the board letter from ENQA, they asked us to address the fact that that it was for the panel not clear what the scope of our activities will be after 2022. We can already say that we do not expect significant changes, and that we will still have a lot of activities within the scope of the ESG. So also there we think we can answer by 2022 on this question, and we will be glad to do that. So this was it from my side.
Great, great, Patrick. Thank you very much for this presentation and for basically answering all my questions at the end of the presentation. This then gives me an opportunity to invite our colleagues to ask their questions. Basically, there are two ways of doing this. You can raise your hand. There's a small hand in the very bottom right corner of your screen, next to the place where you can type your message. You can raise your hand and I can enable your microphone and video, and then you obviously need to allow it, and by that you will appear on the screen. Or you can simply type your question in the chat box. These are the two ways of asking your questions. I see that Sebastian already posted one question. So who arranges the documents, self-assessment report, etc., both for ENQA and the agency under review before, during, and after site visits? And how many people are usually involved over the whole review cycle? Basically, we have a secretariat, as you know, and I would be the one preparing drafts when it comes to board letters, these kind of things. But from the agency side, Patrick, you can elaborate who will be the one preparing the follow-up report, let's say it like that. I guess it will be you, no?
Well, in fact, preparing the follow-up report will be the responsibility. In fact, within our team, we will discuss who will be responsible for writing the follow-up report. But as it always goes in our agency, we are a small agency, so we discuss everything in the team. First discussion, then we assign someone to do the work. We come back to the team, and then based on the work we already made, we will send this to the advisory board. They will reflect on that, and finally, the final discussion and decision on this document, progress, the follow-up report. This will be done by our QA board.
In a way, you already answered how many people are usually involved over the whole review cycle. Since you're a small agency, if I understand correctly, all of you, all of the staff is a sort of a working group, and then the board when needed. Then there is a second question: is there a kind of a financial support from national, regional authorities to engage in ENQA reviews? Patrick, you can perhaps explain for Belgium, for Flanders, if there's any. I can then jump in for the rest of Europe.
Well, we don't receive any financial support because our agency is not dependent of any government funding. So, in fact, every assessment we carry out is paid by the program, by the institution. So and this is indeed a difficult aspect, that we have to make sure that after 5 years we also think of paying for this kind of reviews, that we still have enough finances for paying for this review. Yes, so we have to do it ourselves.
And I can also add that for most of the reviews that I've been engaged so far, most of them have been national agencies, and in this sense they remain independent from the ministries also in that sense, but they already budget in their planning the review fee as well, and costs related to it. And they do not receive any additional funding to receive, let's say, additional financial support to undergo an ENQA review, not from what I have experienced so far. And I see there's one more question. There's a suggestion to replace progress visits with a second site visit. What will be the focus of this visit? To monitor how the agency progresses on the ENQA recommendations? No, that would not be the case, because these two site visits would be hypothetically 2 or 3 months apart. So the first site visit would be very much compliance-oriented one, where the panel would dig into ESG and how the agency complies with these standards, whereas the second site visit would be would provide sort of a basis for 2 days of discussions on strategic matters of the agency, how it follows its fitness for purpose, how it engages with its stakeholders, these kind of things. Now, this is obviously also already mentioned in the ESG, but it would be another level of discussions. It would be more of enabling agency to freely speak about things, not being afraid of being judged on the matters that they are considering. But this is still very much of an idea in our heads. And let's see where it takes us. I have to say that this is not something that will happen. It is something that the board will consider before it goes to our members as a proposal. Agus is also writing, from the results of ENQA external review, what makes the progress visits disputable? What improvement? Okay. Well, our external review, so the external review that ENQA as such has undergone in 19 and this year, show that there is no dispute. The panel was not critical of the progress visit. It was us as an association that was self-critical in a way, being worried that to what extent are we using some of our panel members 2 years after the review in order to help them further advance with their work, but at the same time, where's this line where we become a consultancy agency or consultancy organization? And in this sense, we are trying to make it clear that this doesn't happen. So we are searching for solutions to that. So the improvement would be indeed that we are considering having 2 sites visits as part of the review, and then not bother agency with let's say enhancement-oriented discussions 2 years after this review happens. This was basically, or is still, an idea. Let's see where it takes us. One among others. There are quite some. Sebastian is also typing something. As ACAN has no full-time review manager, but rather part-time one sitting with the member agencies, what kind of advice would you give to ACAN, and how should a distributional task look like between the currently also part-time ACAN secretariat hosted by MQA? Well, difficult one. Yes. For others, MQA is an agency in Malaysia where they host ACAN. So one thing is for sure that making it sure that that person knows how to split him or herself into different roles. This happens a lot also in ENQA because you can see as ENQA as an agency, obviously, reviewing other agencies, so performing EQA. But at the same time, we are a network, an association of our members, and we need to. We are there to support our members, such as Fluor QA, with different projects. We meet each other, even on a daily basis sometimes, in different projects. And in this sense, where's this line where we jump from one role to another? I'm a coordinator of a review, and then suddenly I'm also part of a project where I'm a colleague with other ENQA members. So in this sense, we have made it quite clear in our rules of procedure what is ENQA as an agency, if I say so, and who is involved there. Our guidelines for ENQA agency reviews describe the role of reviews manager, and what he, in this case, what I do. And when I change my hat, I make this very clear. This is one of the ways of doing it. We are not perfect in that, I have to say, but since 2019, me and my colleague Milja, I don't know if you met her, we decided in the secretariat to make this internal boundaries between the ENQA as an agency and ENQA as an association even stronger. I hope I answered it. It was a bit elaborated. Patrick, perhaps your reflection on our idea of having 2 site visits. I'm curious.
Yeah, this is also so new for me. In fact, I do not have an opinion yet, because I do not know what the idea,
Sure.
the full idea is. But as a first comment, we needed the time we had from June till, let's say, February, March, April, to reflect, to discuss with our stakeholders, with the board, about all the topics from the site visit, about the recommendations. So if you have a second visit, already more enhancement-led, after a first site visit, and that within 2 or 3 months, it can be, from my perspective, it might be too soon. But that's just the first reflection.
Sure, this is indeed something that keeps us busy, if I say so as well, how to do it, not to be too close to the first review, but still part of the cycle. But indeed, we will try to find a solution to it before the full proposal goes to our members in May. Sebastian is writing, let's create a case study. Assuming the next ACAF review goes to law, what would be, in your view, a possible scenario for role profiles of one, staff at ACAN Secretariat accompanying the process, coordinator, so to speak, and B, August as a review manager for a site visit to the agency in law, and C, the review panel, the review panel, just a fictional scenario. So a coordinator would be the one that would contact the agency in law, in this case, after the terms of reference and the contract is already set up by August as a reviews manager. So August would be the one that would first contact the agency, explaining the nature of such a review, getting the contract done, basically this paperwork. The terms of reference would be set by him as well. Also, the panel would be composed, and then this would be given to into the hands of a coordinator, the one that would accompany the process on site. This person would read the self-assessment report for scrutiny. Obviously, this person, he or she, would not be part of the panel. I need to make it clear. But this person would then accompany the panel to law, and this person would answer questions during the site visit on consistency. Let's say how this particular principle in your case is interpreted, what elements should be taken into account, what kind of documentation is usually asked for from the agency, these kind of matters. Not answering about the compliance of the agency on specific principles. Also, all the logistical matters would be done by this person, because this person is obviously the one that will be there. So it is the easiest way of doing it. And then the review panel would be the one taking principles and checking how the agency complies. I use this word as in the European higher education area with ACAF in this case. So this is kind of division of roles. When coming back, this same person would also receive the draft external review report and scrutinize it so that it fits the guidelines or the guidebook for your reviews in this case. And after the report would be done, it would go to August as a reviews manager to coordinate it further with well, in ENQA's case, with our board. So you see this division of roles. I see you're typing something, so let's see. Since in ACAN, as of now, these roles are still part-time, would you think a financial compensation is in order, or should this be part of the package, so to speak? I would say so. It would be good if agencies would receive some support undergo a review. I can share with you a concept that is used in European higher education area, if I say so. Sometimes, how to elaborate it? Sometimes agencies would use European Commission's funding through Erasmus Plus projects to gain money, to not to undergo a review. This is a bit different, but to enhance with their compliance on the ESG. There's a SECA ESG project that I'm aware of, where agencies actually have a series of events, discussions, also with ENQA, where they see where they stand with a particular standard. Mostly it is the issue of independence and these kind of matters that are rather tricky in different countries and need ministerial support. Because the legislation needs to change before they can become, let's say, even partially compliant on the matter. And in this sense, they would use this kind of funding. So this is one of ways of getting this money. Members lend their staff to ACAN. Well, this is sort of a help to the secretariat of ACAN. Yeah. I don't know how it would be perceived if you would receive, let's say, support from FLUR QA to ENQA Secretariat and not, let's say, 2-3 other agencies in order to help us with our activities, but at the same time, then after, let's say, 2, 3, 4 years, arrange and perform a review for them. I think this would not be in line with the standard on independence. But then again, because you would need a support precisely because of reviews. So there's a question to you, Patrick. Since FLUR is not receiving government support, how is institutional funding usually secured? Membership fees, accrediting fees, etc.
Yes, we are funded by our evaluations. So we receive money for our evaluations. There is no membership fee because we are a quality assurance agency within a membership organization, but we are not a membership organization. So we receive the money from for every evaluation we carry out.
Well, quite straightforward. Thank you. Swartini is asking, can some of the responsibilities of the coordinators be delegated to the agency that is being reviewed? Well, we do ask, in our case, agency, our agencies under review to help us with some of the logistical matters, but even with that, it is rather limited. We would ourselves book, let's say, accommodation, flights would be arranged by experts themselves, these kind of things. So we rather of asking agency to help us in organizational matters, we employ our experts, if I say so. They would do their own bookings and so on, rather than asking the agency for. One of the things that I can think of when it comes to getting some help from an agency under review is just getting some recommendations for the dinners of the panel. All right. I see that no one is typing anymore. We are 20 minutes late, but it does not matter because I think it is important to use this opportunity. Even that's fine, Sebastian. No, that's absolutely fine. I was talking way too much at the beginning, and I know that all of this would look a lot more different if we would all be in Brussels and getting our coffee and chocolates and using half of the day to elaborate on follow-up procedures and progress visits. face to face, but still, this hour and a half is a minimum we can do in order to help our colleagues, if I say so. Well, Patrick, let me thank you first for your time and for your input in giving some flesh to my my initial presentation on how it is in theory. And thank to all the colleagues from ASEAN in joining this webinar. I hope it was useful to you, and until next time.